Hey folks, Saturn-Venus conjunction is very important. Happens every year as Venus comes around and hits Saturn, wherever Saturn is in the sky. And I'm going to be talking about what happens when Saturn and Venus come together. Currently, as I'm recording this, January 14th, 2025, Saturn and Venus are close together in the sign of Aquarius. And, you know, one of the things that really determines the nature of how the Saturn-Venus conjunction operates, whether it's like in your chart or in the sky, has to do with the signs that they're in. And of course, that is often determined by where Saturn is, because Saturn is the slower moving transit. So I'm going to be talking about those things today. Do join the channel if this is helpful to you. Click join and ring the bell to be notified. That would really help a lot. So, and you know, I do a lot of videos like this off and on, so please join. So, as it says here on the slide, Saturn-Venus conjunction relationship boundaries. One of the things to really understand is that, you know, Venus is the energy of our agreements. That's the way we experience Venus the most, is in our desire to connect with others and how much we're willing to slide on our individuality and our individual strength and, you know, purpose in order to have connection with another person. So that individuality and personal drive and strength is ruled by Mars. Like, this is me, I want this, this is where I'm going, these are my, you know, this is my identity and I'm willing to fight for it, right? And also that desire to be right. So the whole sort of false choice between, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy, is kind of the choice between Mars and Venus. Yes, I want to be right, and I have to be right about certain things. Certain things are willing to fight for, right? And we'll be willing to break connection, and we need to be willing to break connection over certain righteous principles, like I'm not going to be abused or mistreated or whatever it might be. In that case, Mars will break connection no matter how much we like the other person. At least we should be willing to do it. But Venus is the part of us that wants the connection. And the first part of the connection is we find something beautiful about the other person. Maybe it's just physical beauty at first. And when we're more immature, all of our early relationships are more physically motivated, physical attraction. That's Venus, sex. But as we get older, we realize that we find things that are more refined, like love, connection, and other sources of subtle beauty to be more important. But Venus is still the thing that's driving it. It's still a desire to get the attention from them. It's still, we want the connection. So again, there's a lot of illusions around Venus, because we think, because I compromised and I agreed with things, I've done some heroic act. No, it's not some heroic act to compromise so that you can get what you want, because we learn that if we want to get what we want, which is the connection, whether it's based on sex or beauty or some imagined good feeling and real good feeling, that if we want that, we have to compromise and agree. And it has to be something that's given by their consent. So we compromise because we want to get what we want. So always remember that about all of your agreements. You're not a martyr because you were nice to somebody to get what you want. Again, that's just the reality. And at the end of relationships, we tend to only think of how, oh, I did so much, I would have done anything. Yes, you would have done anything to get what you want, including compromise your own values and standards, which is the Mars that I was talking about. So this is the Venus conundrum. Saturn is the boundaries, though, as it says here, relationship boundaries. Saturn is where over time we have learned this thing that I'm talking about. Saturn is the pressure of time to show us the truth. So the things I'm talking about here, I'm bringing out a lot of Saturn themes, like what we often call harsh realities. To me, they're not harsh. Reality is just, if it's a measure of reality, then I'll take it. If it's harsh, I'll deal with the harsh part. But I'd rather have the reality than the unreality or the fantasy, because eventually reality is going to crush the fantasy. And we can cry about it, but it's not going to change it. So again, it just depends on what we want and what we're ready for. And we're not always ready for every harsh reality at every stage of development. It doesn't mean it's not going to come. And when we're younger, we haven't experienced enough harsh realities yet. As we get older, we start to realize it. And again, they become less harsh. When Saturn is powerful in our chart, those realities aren't as harsh. When we're younger, they feel more harsh, and we also have a lot more energy to keep trying. So when people are younger in their relationship development, maybe the things I just said about Venus, and it's really your desires and the things that you want, it's like, oh no, I was really mistreated, and I did really do that, and I am really that. And they don't like when I say this kind of stuff, because I'm saying, look in the mirror if you want to really learn about this thing. Because over time, it took me a while to also say, you know what? And also studying the divine karma of astrology shows these realities to be very practical. And practical means that they're things we can practice. So when we get Saturn-Venus conjunction, sort of like we have in the sky here, January 14th, 2025, and every year when Venus comes around and joins Saturn, it's a time for us to experience those realities. And what those realities wind up showing is boundaries. And we become more comfortable with our boundaries, with the boundaries of others, and ultimately with our own solitude. Because as this relationship energy matures, and as we become more mature with relationship energy, there's not this clutching and this clinging and this loss of dignity and self and this feeling of disrespect that comes with relationships and with Venus when we compromise and agree to things that we shouldn't have agreed to, or when we remain childish about Venus themes. We're not mature enough to have a boundary in the moment, and then we go along with something that maybe we shouldn't have, and then later blame it on the other person because, again, we agreed to the thing, and now we're blaming the other person for the thing we agreed to, when instead we didn't have the strength to put up the boundary in the beginning and say, you know what, this is not in my best interest, and I'm willing to not feel that connection that I want in order to do what I know is right, because I've learned over time that it's better to not initiate and start something that I'm going to feel disrespected and unappreciated for later. So that's a complicated way to say boundaries. Now, again, boundaries are also very complicated because we can have a healthy boundary where we feel good about putting up the boundary because we're like, okay, this thing is not going to be in my best interest. And it's not just romantic relationships. It's also business agreements. All other kinds of agreements are also related to Venus. Any kind of connection where two adults are agreeing to share and magnify their enjoyment with the other person's consent. That's Venus. Two adults in an agreement. And so if we're comfortable with the agreement, then we're willing to be very serious going in and say, okay, this is a no compromise zone. This has to be there. And then we hammer it out, and the boundaries are good. They're clear. The expectations are real. And if we don't have the agreement, we're okay with it. I can live with it or live without it. I don't need it in order to feel comfortable by myself or within myself. I can just do it alone. So when we have good boundaries, that doesn't disappear just because we have a relationship with another person. Even if the other person doesn't have good boundaries and they're constantly saying, no, you're doing this to me or whatever. If we have good boundaries, we don't get lost. We don't get confused. We maybe try to work with that, but we know inside that you're violating my boundaries here. What I did was not mean or anything else or whatever it might be. And if you can't understand and respect this boundary, then, I can just be alone and be okay with it. Again, most of the time, we won't even get into those situations if we have good boundaries and we're mature, because we will recognize the quote warning signs or whatever it might be. We can see when someone doesn't have good boundaries or they're unrealistic. Again, that's a very good Saturn theme, is realistic, being realistic. And again, it can be business partnerships, it can be romantic partnerships. So when we have good boundaries, Saturn will just say, nah, I don't think so, right? When they're not good, then we're not really sure. And when we're not sure, maybe our boundaries are too high. And instead of it being a realistic boundary where we've learned about ourselves over time, we're pushing things away. And this is what can happen when we get older and we've experienced so much relationship struggle that we're afraid of the connection because we know we can't handle the boundary very well. When we get older, you'll see Saturn themes become much more important in Venus areas of life than almost anything else. These are the last two planets in the planetary order. Venus is a very refined energy of wanting to share our energy with someone else, but within the container of self-awareness, solitude, and the hard-won lessons of Saturn. As we get older, if we haven't learned the maturity, then relationships become something where we kind of isolate ourselves off and we're like, oh, I don't do that anymore. And we can feel the bitterness and frustration and anger and insulation of Saturn because we can't manage our boundaries very well. So the boundaries are so high, we don't let anyone in. But we also, no one gets in, but we also don't experience that joy that we want, because Venus is still wanting to connect and experience that beauty and joy. So again, the other thing that's great with the Saturn-Venus maturity over time is if these things are healthy and powerful in our life, and we can see this in our chart, and you can either have a very, like a healthy Venus and a healthy Saturn, then we're going to be able to navigate these things. They'll be aware and, there'll be a lot of awareness. Then what happens is we're not afraid of being alone. Fear of being alone doesn't exist. I can be alone or I can be with someone else. I still find beauty and happiness whether I'm with you or I'm not with you. I would rather be with you because I really like when we can share that happiness together and magnify that happiness. It feels so good. But if it comes at the expense of disrespect or you feeling it and then projecting it back or whatever it might be, then I'd rather be alone than have that happen. And I'd rather be alone and still open to the fact that a better, more aligned situation will come along, but I'm not clinging for it. I'm not desperate for it. I'm not unrealistic about it. Because again, that's going to show up to another person as well. They'll see it. They'll see the desperation and they'll be like, oh, I don't know. So this Saturn, this is really what the boundaries are with Saturn and Venus. It's these kinds of things. Again, these are the last two planets in the planetary order where trying to integrate beauty, but having beauty be something that we are embodying within our own self and consciousness, not something that we project outward onto others. And so, again, I hope I explained this well. And again, as I'm recording this January 14th, 2025, this Saturn-Venus conjunction is in Aquarius and it's getting closer. So over from between now and the end of January, the next couple of weeks, we're going to really feel this, the next week, next couple of weeks, we're going to really feel this. And we're already feeling it. You're already feeling your connection to boundaries and whatnot. So If this was helpful, please share it, join the channel, and
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel.